While the Covenant had us locked up in here, I overheard the guards talking about this ring world. They call it Halo.
Just a quick one before the video starts. After I had completed and rendered this video, I realized that the occasional popping sound I was hearing was not from my slowly dying monitor, but actually from the recorded audio. I tried my best to reduce it, and it is only present in a few parts of the video, but it is there and I apologize. Maybe just think of it as the crackling of a warm fire while I tell you boring stories about something I know less about than you for the next hour or so.
A game I am ashamed that I've never played. I have actually played it very, very briefly. Is Half-Life 2.
Oh, wow.
It's just one of those games that for some reason I just never played, and now I feel like it was too long ago. It's too old now to pick up. Like the things that make Half-Life 2 so special and so amazing are the fact that at the time it was released, it had all these ideas that were incredibly cutting edge. But so much that's come since has either borrowed or taken inspiration from Half-Life 2 that I would feel going back to Half-Life 2 now, it wouldn't feel like the fresh, trailblazing game that it is. I wouldn't get the true sense of how amazing Half-Life 2 is, because everything in it I've played already in other games.
I watched this video when it was first published back in 2018, and my initial reaction was similar to that of the people behind the camera.
Oh, wow.
Someone who talks about games for a living hasn't even played Half-Life 2? Their credibility is less than nil, their opinions mean nothing, they are nothing and a worm and blah 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 blah.
Be gone, vile man, be gone from me!
I was a bit less rational back then, seemingly giving a toss about what a stranger on the internet thinks about a game I like. Thanks for watching, by the way, please subscribe. And the suggestion that what I considered to be one of the greatest games of all time could be dated just rubbed me up the wrong way, and I decided to play through Half-Life 2 and its episodes to prove how well the game still holds up to this very day, no matter what day it is you see this, and how every single piece of this experience is just as engaging and captivating as it was when it first released in 2004. After skipping the intro section because I wanted to get straight to the shooty bits and defeating the helicopter bomb boss thing, I found myself pondering. I realised that I'd played this game so much that I'd forgotten most of my first experience playing through it, and I wondered whether this whole section was just as timeless and fantastic as I told myself it was. I know now that Root Canal is part of the game that many people highlight as outstaying its welcome, but I've never personally felt that. There's a weird thing when you're younger where you can't really tell if a game or a film or whatever is good or bad, it just is, and you tend to accept things much more easily. Root Canal is as long as it is because that's how long it takes to get to the end. Incidentally, about a year after Half-Life 2 came out, I played Predator Concrete Jungle, and I distinctly remember that being the first game I played where I questioned a lot of what I was experiencing. After realising that I was completely and utterly biased towards Half-Life 2, I accepted that it would be impossible for me to gauge whether or not it still holds up today for someone who has never played it before. And that thought stuck with me, and many times since then I've had discussions with other humans where I've mentioned that one game or another was phenomenal when it came out. Phenomenal games inspire others, the industry as a whole evolves, and those once new and standout features become the norm. Try going back to play a game where the right stick doesn't control the camera. It feels really weird and too different to what we're used to now, which can put people off playing altogether and can prevent people from at least understanding what made that experience special. This happens in all sorts of other things too, like The Wizard of Oz being in colour, which was groundbreaking at the time, and the Beatles could be held responsible in some way, indirectly or otherwise, for almost every band on the planet. Everyone was so inspired by these sorts of events almost that what made them special was adopted and built on by other people and morphed into other things that are themselves now outdated. Though personally I was never much of a Beatles fan, I prefer a more nuanced and subtle style of music that explores a deeper subject matter. Which brings me on to Halo Combat Evolved. Everyone knows it, plenty of people love it, and I never played it. It was an Xbox launch title and I had my PC and my PS2. Back then, I would only play first-person shooters on my PC, and while that has now become true again today, there was a period in between when I would reduce myself to using a gamepad to play a PlayStation exclusive shooter. By the time Halo released, I'd also lived through the hype of GoldenEye on the N64, and I'd even had a go at that around at my mate's house. I hated it. I mean, what the hell is this nonsense? I've got Half-Life and Quake at home, why have I come over here to suffer through this? Seeing Halo held up as such a massive event but being restricted to the Xbox console made me shrug it off as scraps for the bottom feeders and not worth bothering with. I feel like even back then, Halo has always had this certain arrogance about itself, which irks me too. I mean, the player character is called Master Chief, for Christ's sake, and that menu music sounds like a choir in awe of the smell of their own farts. It just struck me as being a bit full of itself. So what happened? Why have I finally decided to experience one of the most well-regarded games in history now? Well, it was a combination of things. Those things being that I recently played through Half-Life 2 and its episodes again and was reminded of this train of thought. And the realization that I have Game Pass on PC and therefore have access to the Master Chief Collection, so why the hell not? Once I finally got it all working, I tried to do a bit of research into what it was about Halo that made it so special, which I found surprisingly difficult being so far removed from its original launch. The overwhelming majority of search results were people looking back fondly on the game and how they'd never seen anything like it before and how they felt playing it, how it takes them back to simpler times and all the other nostalgic cliches. My own personal recollection from that period was people mostly talking about completing it on Legendary and how good the multiplayer was, which is another thing that put me off playing it for so long, as I've no interest in multiplayer games and I've never fully bought into the suggestion that the satisfaction of pushing through a difficult encounter is a reasonable reward. Don't get me wrong, I felt great after a particularly difficult poo in the past, but it's not the sort of experience I actively seek out. I asked a couple of people recently about what made Halo stand out back in the day, and while most of them said either multiplayer or co-op, they did reinforce my memory of this being the first game, or at least the first massively popular game, to restrict the player to carrying only 2 weapons. I do seem to remember most shooters copying this system afterwards, especially when the industry moved to the modern shooter trend after Call of Duty 4, and for a while at least I remember many outlets referring to this as a Halo style system. Everything else my fellow humans could remember was quite specific to it being on a console, like Halo feeling closer to a PC shooter than any other console FPS thanks to how the right stick directly moves the sights. This was a big deal, and the imitation of this system is likely what convinced me to give games like Killzone and Red Faction 2 a go on the consoles. What I gathered from all this before playing it is that Halo was basically the best console shooter on the market when it came out. Feeling like a PC shooter, but able to be played while slumped on a sofa with a controller the size of Andre the Giant's swollen fist, proving that there was a viable alternative to keyboard and mouse when it came to cracking headshots. I've also seen a few mentions that Halo was, if not the first, then one of the first games to have a dedicated grenade button rather than having you swap your weapons, speeding up the flow of combat, and something which I definitely feel is a vast improvement over the older and slower method that was the norm beforehand. I also came to understand that people generally weren't happy with the anniversary edition of this game, as the improved graphics apparently took away from the atmosphere of the original release. I get that. I had similar opinions of New and Tasty, the Abe's Odyssey remake. The thing with early 3D games is that the textures were relatively bland, so our brains create a general vibe that will differ from other people's. So when someone remakes it all in high definition and minute details, it's going to look different from how your brain remembers it. As such, I decided to play through the game with the HD version of the original graphics, though I did pop back to the newer visuals from time to time in some of the more impressive looking areas. After spending the last 2 years mostly covering open world games and their systems, this will be a bit different to most of my previous videos. The last linear game I covered was the original Far Cry, so I'll take a similar approach here and go through the game level by level, discussing the various systems introduced as we go and sharing my meaningless and frankly detestable opinions as we come to them. So I guess here's a spoiler warning, but come on, you've probably already played this game and you're only here waiting for me to trash talk it. You can call me a bitch in the comments. But if you are like me and have never played this game before, then I will be spoiling the story. And similar to Joseph Conrad's 1998 book Heart of Darkness, I feel that there is stuff in here to be spoiled. You have been warned. Before we go any further, I would just like to thank the sponsors of this video, the wonderful and effervescent channel members. Sasuke11457, John Foss, Nevada Cowboy, Unrated Gamers, Combat Medic 25, and Scott Parker. Not only do members get basked in glory like that, but they also get early access to these videos. There's currently only one level of membership, and it's as cheap as YouTube would let me set it, and memberships directly support the channel in producing this drivel, as well as helping me to be able to use swear words for comedic effect without having to worry as much about YouTube demonetizing me. However, because I'm nice, I also give free shoutouts on the next release to people who can follow simple instructions on the big wall of text at the start of the video. This time we had Fayefox and Dante correctly answer that question, so here's their shoutout. Does that feel good? Yeah, you like that, don't you? Oh no, wait, no, it's not that sort of thing, stop it. Anyway, where were we? Ah yes, The Pillar of Autumn. This being the Anniversary Edition, the game defaults to the new and updated graphics for Halo Combat Evolved. One of the features which I think is actually pretty cool and should be included on any direct remake like this is being able to change between original and newer graphics at the push of a button. The thing is, you can't do this during cutscenes, or at least I couldn't, and after watching the older, clunkier animations play over more modern graphics, I was further convinced of my decision to play this game with the HD version of the original graphics. To further my previous point, and it is becoming more and more relevant as we see an increase in the amount of remakes, they very often get other teams in to make these reskins of older games. The problem with that is that these people won't know what the original team was trying to achieve with their more limited tech, so facial details and texture designs will sometimes feel off and against the vibe and atmosphere of the original. That said, there are instances in this game where I think the updated graphics are an improvement, but we'll get to that when we get there. My wife and I often posit that newer media seems to go to greater and greater lengths to explain everything going on, whereas films from our childhood seem to skip most of the details and get straight into the action. I mean, yeah, Star Wars had a literal wall of text, but we weren't told why the war started, only these are the baddies and these are the goodies, and then we get dropped right into an action set piece. Halo starts with the military ship Pillar of Autumn dropping out of lightspeed after apparently fleeing a battle. I know that Halo Reach is a prequel and ends just before this moment, I think, but that was about the extent of my Halo knowledge coming into this game. That and the name of our enemy, the Covenant. We aren't told why humanity is at war with the Covenant, or if it even is just humanity. I mean, this could be a Mass Effect sort of universe with all sorts of aliens in different allegiances. Maybe I'll find out one day if I play the other games, but for now we just know that the humans of Earth are at war with the Covenant, and we have just come out of a blind jump away from a battle only to be greeted by a fleet of 9 enemy cruisers and a weird hula hoop looking thing orbiting the nearby planet. Cortana is a name that I've heard several times during my life lived on the internet, so when she pops up here it was one of those that's such and such moments that you only get from having heard about something for so long without any context. Cortana was the first Halo-based one of these for me. The surprisingly sassy ship's AI, who seems to be basically running the ship herself. I mean, what is Captain Keyes really there for? Just in case she goes Skynet? Or does the human military refuse to take orders from a computer? A woman computer at that, so they just need a man around to outrank her and make all the big important decisions? Anyway, the ship is under attack, so we go to battle stations, and we see a scene that was clearly written just after watching Aliens. Now, I love Aliens, it's possibly my favourite film, so I love these guys. Apparently the speech Sergeant Apone makes is different depending on which difficulty setting you are playing on. Obviously I couldn't appreciate this detail until I learned about it after having completed the game, but that's something I wish more games did. Include little differences to make difficulty settings more than just adjusting the damage numbers. Put new but ultimately inconsequential content in there, but not too much. Not like Shadows of the Empire that require you to complete it on the hardest difficulty to get the actual ending. Fuck that nonsense. But a comedy ending? Sure, go for it. I mean, this isn't canon, is it? Cortana sends the order to wake up the Master Chief from cryostasis in preparation for enemy boarding, and we finally get a look at the suit that we'll be wearing for the next 15 hours or so. Now, just to reiterate, I know nothing about the universe of Halo outside of what is in this game, other than I think Cortana goes missing at some point or something like that. Master Chief is obviously some sort of super soldier, and I'm sure there was some dialogue or text in a loading screen that mentioned him being a cyborg. So are there lots of these guys? Is Master Chief a rank? Should there have been at least one more of these guys on the Pillar of Autumn, because this room feels too unsymmetrical to have been designed entirely around one dude. And I'm not saying this game needs to explain all of this, I'm just oversharing my internal monologue while I was playing the game. Anyway, we finally gain control of Master Chief. Is it Master Chief or is it the Master Chief? I'm not sure, but after a slightly painful moment of making sure we can look up and down and shake it all around, we are let loose without a weapon, which seems a bit daft to me. Maybe put some guns in the room with the elite soldier seemingly only woken up in emergency situations? No? The engineer's room gets breached by Covenant forces and we start scarpering through the ship as personnel get blown up and trade fire with all sorts of alien gribblies. I spent a good portion of this section scouring the floor for guns to pick up without realising that we aren't allowed to do that yet because it's not that part of the tutorial. So this sort of sequence isn't new to me, where stuff happens around you and you just need to keep moving through it, and I'm not against them at all. But this one in particular is fairly cinematic considering its age and sets the tone of the ship being royally fucked. The thing is, it just didn't feel right to be running away from bad guys and not fighting back. Now maybe it's the decades of build-up that Master Chief has had since, or maybe it was the awe-inspired choir song kicking in at the very sight of our character, but I feel like the game has already done a good job of establishing that Master Chief is the guy to call in an emergency, so it felt counterintuitive to be running away and avoiding conflict while the crew die around him. We make our way to the bridge, where the captain is pretty quick to subtly blame Cortana for the current situation. With their offensive weapons destroyed, Keyes decides to crash land the ship on the big ring thing that they stumbled upon, and as per protocol orders Master Chief to integrate Cortana into his suit to keep her off the ship and out of the way of Covenant hands. If they were to capture her, they would have all available information on the human military, including the location of Earth. Our only objective at this point is to keep Cortana out of the possession of the Covenant and escape the ship before it crash lands. So we plug Cortana into our helmet and make our way to a lifeboat. Now, I just want to post up on Cortana for a moment, and saying that out loud made me realise that there's probably a lot of fan artwork out there that I'd really rather not think about. But anyway, Cortana is unlike any sentient AI creature that I've personally come across, not like that in any form of media before. Other than living in your helmet, she could have been a human character. She's quippy, sassy, and has an interesting choice of slang for an American-voiced AI program.
Yank me. Sod off!
I do wonder if she started off as a human character and was turned into an AI for gameplay convenience. On the Bridge of the Autumn, she could have easily had a desk that had access to the same information she relays in the intro. And in the Halo control room later on, she could have just hacked into a terminal or something. Now don't get me wrong, this is better because otherwise the entire game would have been a huge escort mission, and we all know that sort of thing can get in the sea and stay there, but it just stood out to me that she doesn't seem to have been written or performed as if she was supposed to be any sort of artificial being. She also acts as Master Chief's fucking babysitter. I mean, I imagine Master Chief must speak more in the future games because I've seen people get excited about meeting his voice actor, and this game can't be the reason for that. He speaks about as much as Schwarzenegger does in the first Terminator film, and he seems a bit dense when he does speak. I dismiss this as him just being a weapon. I mean, they literally keep him in a box until they need him, so it makes sense that he relies on other people to give him orders and instructions. But I wonder if it would have been better to make him a silent protagonist, at least in this game. Or maybe just have him speak at the end like Isaac Clarke did in Dead Space? Oh no, wait, that was just a face reveal, wasn't it? Doesn't he speak in the second game, or am I thinking of someone else? Either way, Cortana does the talking on behalf of Master Chief for the rest of the game, but before we get to that, we need to get off this ship. Starting off with only a pistol, I soon picked myself up the now iconic assault rifle, and was largely unimpressed with it. I mean, yeah, you get plenty of ammo, but it feels useless at range, being about as accurate as a British weather forecast. This section is fairly standard shooter fare, particularly for the time, moving through corridors and shooting the aliens out in front of us. Some of these guys have shields that soak up bullets, and the bigger ones will sometimes scoop out of the way to avoid your fire. I also quickly realised that friendly fire was most definitely a thing here, which is tricky to manage when you're duking it out in a crowded canteen. We eventually find our way to a crowded lifeboat and take off towards the big round hoop thing in space. Despite being the only occupant not wearing a seatbelt, we are somehow the sole survivor of a crash landing. Now, while big open spaces had been done in shooters before 2001, these were usually restricted to the multiplayer PC games rather than the narrative ones, particularly on consoles. I imagine many people would have been taken aback in 2001 at this moment when you emerged from the wrecked escape pod. After fighting your way through fairly typical sci-fi shooter corridors and service tunnels for about 20 minutes, many people may have assumed that this was all the game was going to be. So stepping out of this hatch, with that flare in the distance drawing your attention up to get a look at this entire world literally spread out in front of you, must have felt like something special to people back then. And it still does now, in my opinion, though obviously not in quite the same way. Back then, I guess this was sort of a statement. This ain't your grandma's first-person shooter, this is Halo, motherfucker, strap in. Playing it today for the first time, there was still some of that sense of awe here. I mean, you can literally see the entire Halo looping around above you, something I don't think any other game has really replicated. I mean, the other Halo games might, I don't know, but this whole area, and to a lesser extent the following open section of the Warthog, felt like something straight out of an early 2000s tech presentation. I've seen a few videos online that look at the aesthetics of different time periods, and the early 2000s metallic blues, silvers and greens gave off a sort of mixture of technology and nature, and this area in particular took me right back to that time period. Unfortunately, the game was never able to give me that same sense of visual awe at any other point. I feel like the scene of the autumn crashed at the edge of the cliff was going for this sort of grand scale reveal thing, but to my mind it didn't do nearly as good of a job as this section right here. We don't have time for much sightseeing though, as the Covenant ships are coming in to inspect the wreckage, so we skip over the wide open fields to avoid detection, only to be hounded by a big flying vibrator with wings. I managed to bring it down fairly easily, but that dropship has deployed some lads who are on their way to find me. I push on towards the source of those flares when Cortana detects another lifeboat beacon, and we find the survivors in a big scrap with a load of Covenant forces being reinforced with several dropships worth of other dudes. This is the first big combat section of the game, so this is as good a time as any to discuss the combat a bit. So, let's talk about guns. Roll the montage. As mentioned earlier, Halo limits you to 2 weapons at a time, and it has this really annoying feature of making you start every level with an assault rifle and a pistol regardless of what you ended the last level with. Due to this limitation, I fairly quickly found a combo I liked and mostly stuck with it. At the start of the game there were variations on assault rifles and pistols, with each having their own quirks. The plasma pistol has a charged secondary fire that basically turns it into a grenade. The plasma rifle is awesomely accurate and will strip shields. You can get your hands on that famous needler thing early on too, though I found this to be a bit too slow to be effective. For anyone who hasn't played this, it will fire darts that will track enemies and detonate shortly after they hit. The thing is that the enemies in this game have some weird desire to prolong their existence, and I found myself needling several rock faces that the alien dudes were hiding behind more than I was damaging enemies. There is a sniper rifle and a rocket launcher to be found at various points throughout the game, but due to the weapon carry restriction, the appearance of these weapons is usually a good sign that they're going to be useful in the next area. Later on you can get hold of a shotgun, and I ended up relying on a shotgun and plasma rifle loadout for pretty much the rest of the game after that. Except for when I was offered a sniper or rocket launcher, obviously. One of the limits with this 2-weapon system in any game is that while you can technically equip any gun you find, you're better off going with the gun that your enemy is most commonly using so that you have a steady supply of ammo. But with Halo, while the human weapons do work in this way, enemy plasma weapons don't. You can't pick up extra ammo for these guns because you can't reload them, they just overheat and wear down the battery. What this means is that you will be forced to keep an eye on the corpses of the fallen to spot a replacement weapon when your battery starts to deplete. And I quite like this, as it creates a tension that I last experienced during desperate firefights in Far Cry 2, scouring the floor for some rusted piece of crap rifle to fight my way out with. An added wrinkle with this technique though is the grenades, which come in two varieties, frag and plasma. Frag grenades are frag grenades, but the plasma ones don't bounce as much and will stick to enemies if they hit them directly. This is both a blessing and a curse, because enemies in enclosed areas won't be able to get far away from their mates before they explode, and they'll often take some of their buddies with them. On the flip side, many enemies will charge straight at you if you get too close, and if they've got a grenade stuck to their shins, then you really don't want to be anywhere near them. Explosions in this game will send bodies and weapons flying in all directions, which is a beautiful thing to watch when it's all going to plan. Throwing them down a corridor before backing up and watching the corpses fly out never gets old, though it does make it harder to find weapons on the ground afterwards, as they tend to scatter around the arena a bit. The flip side of these glorious explosions is that they will kill you. A lot. I can't remember the first time I played a game that had a grenade icon, something to show you when you were about to get your ass blown apart like your mum on a Friday night, but Halo definitely doesn't have one. The problem is that plasma grenades are the same colour as the rounds from a plasma rifle, and in frantic situations I found it to be very difficult to keep track of what's happening and where everything is. I'd estimate that at least 80% of my deaths were due to explosions, and not just from grenades. Later in the game, enemies will start rocking rocket launchers, and these can fuck off back into the sea as well. Rockets are a one-hit kill, regardless of your shield and health level, or if you're in a vehicle or not. You won't know an enemy has one until you get killed by it, and they regularly stick one of these dickheads just before a new checkpoint, forcing you to play through the whole encounter again just to have another go at them. So yeah, the explosions are fun, but they also prove to be one of my biggest sources of frustration with this game. I got sniped by a rocket once while flying a big vibrator. I didn't even see the guy and suddenly I'm dead. Right near the end of the game, some of the little grunt enemies have plasma guns that I hadn't seen before, and they seemingly only fire plasma grenades. They also have the little quirk of exploding shortly after they get killed, which I didn't realise until after I'd struggled through a big mob encounter and wanted to try to take this weapon for myself. Fuck you, back to the checkpoint. The Covenant themselves, though, are pretty engaging to fight, even if they do rely on cheap explosive bullshit towards the end. You get the little grunt things, which I do feel are tonally a bit off, but they only really have strength in numbers and will run away to find bigger boys to help them. Then there's what I think are called elites, which usually have a body shield that you'll have to drop before you can damage them. I tended to always prioritise these guys as they drop plasma rifles, which were my weapon of choice. Then there's guys with handheld shields that they can hide behind, and after that there are the hunters, big twats with metal armor plating that take a good amount of effort to kill and usually turn up in pairs. What I liked about the Covenant is that they will dodge out of the way of gunfire, run away from grenades, and each tend to require slightly different tactics to defeat. I mean, the grunts just need to be shot, and I found the elites pretty much require plasma weapons to bring their shields down. The little dudes with shields roll around like a Dark Souls protagonist and leave parts of their body exposed, so shooting around their shield became key. The same could be said about the hunters, but they're huge, fire grenades regularly, and will charge at you, so a lot of jumping about and shooting at their exposed bits was required there. For the most part, I really enjoyed fighting the Covenant throughout this game. You are a one-man action hero sent to wipe out the alien menace, basically, and the game really gives you that feeling. Sometimes the game does throw a few too many in too small of an area and call it a day, which whiffs a little bit of artificial challenge to me, and the sparse supply of health packs is bordering on criminal sometimes, but the recharging shield was enough to carry me through the toughest of scrapes. Unless you're in a flying vibrator and get one shot by a hidden rocket launcher. No, you're bitter. Back to the story, and with our buddies now saved, Cortana calls in a dropship for a Warthog so that we can go and help out the other lifeboat survivors, kicking off the first proper vehicle section. It was cool to see a couple of other dudes jump in to man the gun turret and to have a shoot from the passenger seat, but that excitement quickly drained away when I tried to drive the thing. Who the hell mapped the steering to the camera? We'd had racing games for years before this came out. Who the hell slapped this control scheme together and thought, yep, that's the best it can be? An arsehole, that's who. People gave them Mako from Mass Effect shit for years, and I never fully understood that. I mean, yeah, it's a bit floaty, but at least I can steer it with buttons. I just really hope there aren't any cinematic set pieces that kinda rely on competent driving abilities of one of these things later on, because boy, this control scheme and bouncy physics would surely ruin something like that. I did enjoy these expansive areas though, mostly because the friendly AI actually gets stuck in and is good at killing things. The gunner on the back will take care of things from his perch, and when I was lucky enough to have a sniper in the passenger seat, I could just sit back and roll these two around while they mopped up the Covenant. I think having competent allies helps us to actually want to keep them alive for as long as possible, and most of them seem pretty happy to see me too, which is nice. I don't really get that in real life. We rescue the lifeboat survivors and get them collected by the dropship. Now at this point, Cortana picks up Covenant comms that Captain Keyes is alive and being held on a Covenant cruiser, so we recruit our new dropship pilot and some soldiers to lead a rescue mission. This is where I had my first go with a sniper rifle and the first time encountering gun turrets, which can happily be cleared and used against the alien menace. This section ends in a standoff at the tractor beam that provides access to the cruiser and requires you to defend it against several waves of incoming Covenant. I'll admit that at this point I was a little concerned. I played a bit of Destiny before I got sick of wave defense missions, and this was the second time I'd had to defend against multiple waves of enemies in Halo. Except this one was tediously easy as they spawned in the same spot and I was occupying a gun turret pointing right at them. Luckily though, this was the last time one of these things occurred, or at least it was the last time that there was such an obvious instance of wave defense anyway. Once on board the ship, we make our way through the corridors and encounter some new enemies, bigger elites that have those big glowing sword things that people seem to use a lot in multiplayer, and I was disappointed to discover that I couldn't pick this up, so I guess this is restricted to only the multiplayer modes or something? Some of these chaps can turn invisible too, which is fun. This is more the same gameplay as the first level, but now we're on an alien ship, which is purple and therefore different. I did get lost in this section because it took me getting lost in these similar looking corridors to realise that the levels will use light and other visual cues to get you where you need to go. For instance here, only the white lit doors would open, whereas the red ones were locked shut. Figuring this out is one thing, but finding the open door I hadn't just come through was a different matter. Eventually we find Captain Keyes, who tells us a bit more about the big floating hula hoop that we're all currently hanging out on. I had assumed it was a Covenant homeworld or something like that, but it turns out they don't know where it came from either, only that it's some sort of powerful weapon. They're getting very religious about the whole thing and that they call it Halo. Not the Halo, just Halo. Which is handy because there's already more than enough the things in this game. We can't let the Covenant gain control of such a potentially powerful weapon, so we need to take it for ourselves first. We escape the cruiser in a stolen dropship, and we go in search of something called the Silent Cartographer, which the Covenant believe will lead them to the Halo Control Center. People of a certain age may remember a film called Saving Private Ryan, which is a very famous opening scene set on Omaha Beach during the D-Day landings of World War II.
No shit.
Following the release of this film, many games imitated this set piece in various different ways, with arguably the most famous being the Medal of Honor games on the PC and PlayStation 2. A similar trend involving large pillar-lined rooms would occur after the release of The Matrix, but this level felt like Halo's take on the then classic beach storming mission. We're dropped off under fire with our cohort, storming the enemy gun emplacements with a thumping soundtrack keeping us pumped up and moving forward. Once we take the beach, we jump in another bloody Warthog and go to find the Silent Cartographer. Our search leads us through several combat encounters to a locked door, which requires us to backtrack and go to another facility to unlock it, which also requires significant backtracking to get back to the now unlocked door. For my tastes, this game has a bit of a backtracking issue, and this persists throughout most of the rest of the game. You fight your way through an area to an objective, and then have to fight your way out again. Now I know it's a shooter, so either way you'd just be shooting stuff whichever way you escaped, but psychologically it felt tedious to me whenever I found out I just had to go back the way I came, and this happens throughout so much of this game. There's nothing new really added to the game throughout these sections other than the introduction of those hunter things I mentioned earlier. We find the Silent Cartographer, which is just an overly poncy name for a digital map, and Cortana remarks how the Halo control room reads more like a temple or a shrine. A comment which seems like foreshadowing, but I don't remember amounting to anything. Maybe I missed something, maybe it gets built on in the sequels, maybe it makes more sense when you've played the game for the 18th time and devoured lore videos on YouTube. Who knows? Probably lots of people actually. We call for the dropship to take us to those coordinates and are told that we have lost contact with Captain Keyes, who has gone underground. Though again, unless I missed something, I didn't catch why he was running around underground, though I guess he's leading his own search for the control room. We get dropped off underground and fight our way through Covenant forces in these rather repetitive and almost identical rooms, which I'm so glad to have finally seen the last of after moving through this section. Oh boy, it'd sure be a pain to have to traipse through more of these tedious rooms again. This does get mixed up with some more big open combat arenas where we can play with vehicles, and I finally get my hands on one that doesn't handle like your mom after a few pints of stout. The Ghost lets you strafe and has laser guns on the front, so I took to circling opponents like Serious Sam and holding down fire until they died, or running over them if there wasn't enough room to orbit. I also came across the big tank things here, something I've since learned that you can pilot yourself, but I never got the opportunity to and assumed it wasn't possible. They were always either destroyed or had dudes in them, so I never got to have a go myself. This whole section up to the control room feels like a gauntlet, and I mean that in a good way, as it's appropriate given what it is we're working towards. That said, there is a lot of repetition in the environments, from grey rooms to snowy areas to grey bridges and snowy bridges. The combat is fun enough and the enemy variety is mixed up a bit, but the repeating environments made some sections feel more like padding. It started to feel to me like they made the entire area to scale and then fit the levels into that model, if that makes sense. And the reason we have so many repeating rooms is because that's how many rooms you need to get from one end to the other. That's very clever and all that, but every reveal into another indistinct room drained some of the excitement out of me. I really hope this section sees the last of that sort of thing. We make it to the control room and plug Cortana into the system, who then has a bit of a paddy and sends us off to go and find Captain Keyes before he does something so dangerous that she couldn't possibly give us an explanation over the radio. We go through a little bit of a swamp and into another facility where we start to see the signs of combat. Now, I used to completely miss environmental storytelling like this in games. I was completely oblivious to all of it. The first time I played Dark Souls, I never reacted to the pile of bloated corpses at the bottom of New Londo. My brain just registered it as a texture rather than something done deliberately to build the world. Luckily, I'm a bit more switched on these days, so the corpses and massive bloodstains strewn around the wreckages of this place stood out to me, and I knew something was going on. I had heard about my flood during my time in the online, but I had no idea what they were, though I was fairly certain I was about to meet them. I'm not sure if this guy could be kept alive, but I thought it better if I put him out of his misery. We then see the recording of a dead Marine as Keyes and his posse unwillingly unleash swarms of these little balloon-looking things. Next thing we know, these critters are tearing the doors down all around us. So it turns out the Flood is actually some sort of parasitic alien that jumps at enemies and turns them into zombies. Not like that though, these are angry zombies that can move quickly and jump at you. Not like that though, this was before those. Also, these zombies are revealed to be intelligent enough to potentially build ships, at least I think that's what they were suggesting, and they soon get their hands on guns, so that's something else. I'll admit that I have mixed opinions on the Flood. On one hand, I really like them as an enemy. I think it was a good idea to introduce a new faction at this point that acts differently to the others and as such have to be approached in different ways when fighting them. I learned to time shooting the big exploding ones to take out more of the others, and the shotgun quickly became my friend when I learned that these guys tend not to run for cover but instead charge right at you. Then there's the way they pile down corridors towards you. It's a very effective way of visually signalling how fucked you are if you stand still. They come at you in huge numbers, but luckily they go down fairly easily, just like your dad. On the other hand though, that one Flood section where you are following the Guilty Spark is probably my least favourite of the entire game. I've already complained about repetitive environments feeling like padding, but fuck me with a stale loaf of jalapeno bread, that section can roll itself up into a ball, get in a cannon, strap that cannon to a rocket, fire itself into the moon, and then have the moon nuked several times. Other than the continuously repeating and identical environments, I think the big problem with this section is that it's just you and the Flood, and some sentry robots occasionally. The rest of the time when the Flood are involved, there are usually either Marines or Covenant around, and there's a certain satisfaction in games where you can sit back and watch the AI fight among itself. And I think that is when the Flood works best, when they chase you down a corridor into a big room with other AI controlled pissed off characters in there. This library section though just goes on and on and on, and it just felt like a tax of my time. I remember getting to the lift and being relieved that it was over, not realizing that there were 2 more lifts and 3 more corridor sections to trudge through first. You see that meme about wanting to replay a game but the thought of that level holds you back? This is that for me. It's not even particularly hard, it's just monotonous and long, just like this video. Anyway, now the Flood have been unleashed, we need to get out of there, so we backtrack our way all the way back up to the swamp, and here we are introduced to 343 Guilty Spark. Incidentally, I wish there was more game in this swamp environment. It's pretty oppressive with the lack of visibility, especially when the Flood tend to blend in so well with the environment. More swamp in my sci-fi shooters, please. Anyway, we fight our way towards a pickup point and are greeted by Peter Dinklage, who I've just realised says that he's the monitor for Installation 04. Now, I initially took that to mean the facility we just climbed out of was Installation 04, but right now I'm thinking that this is Halo number 4, which would make sense because there's a whole series of these games, and this can't be the only one where the name makes sense, right? Anyway, Wheatley tells us that he's here to stop the spreading of the Flood, and you need to help him. For some reason. I'm interested to know what would happen if the Flood escaped by their own means and there was no one else around. Like, shouldn't Nolan North be able to take care of this by himself without kidnapping some random dude with a gun? Anyway, we now have to collect a MacGuffin called the Index so that we can activate the Halo and stop the Flood, which throughout the course of this level we are told they spread through the spores emitted from victims, which I guess is kind of like cordyceps, but before anyone knew what that was. So yeah, this is that level that I would still class as the worst part of the game. If it was shorter, I wouldn't have such an issue with it, but bloody hell, it gets repetitive and tedious incredibly quickly. Arguably the worst part is that the cutscene at the start suggests that the Index is right outside the door we teleport in behind, so why am I traipsing through all these corridors to get to it? I know it's because of the energy shield or whatever, but you have to climb up 3 or 4 floors of these infected corridors just to get on another lift and suddenly wind up back at the control room. I was so glad to be done with this section, and I almost felt exhausted having finally conquered it. It wasn't even that challenging, it's just an emotionally draining section to suffer through. Guilty Spice teleports us back to the control room with the Index so we can activate the Halo and defeat the Flood. At this point, the Cortana gets all snarky with us because she has access to the entire systems of this giant and ancient installation, but we've just been running around on her orders with next to no information. Turns out the only way to stop the Flood is to starve it to death, but the thing is, it eats pretty much anything with a heartbeat. When activated, the Halo will wipe out all sentient life in the galaxy to ensure that the Flood will be prevented from spreading. Watching this conversation back again, I realise now that yes, there are other Halos out there because he mentions combining all of their death blasts spread to wipe out everything. Well, Guilty Spark calmly confirms what Cortana is saying. He says, "Last time you asked me if it were my choice, would I do it?" Which I'm assuming is some sequel or maybe prequel bait or something, because I don't think Master Chief asks him anything of the sort. He certainly doesn't seem the type to ask any deep questions like that. Anyway, Cortana detects movement, which I assume is the Covenant come to reclaim the control room. Guilty Spark swears to kill us, and what follows is my second least favourite section of the game, though the reason for that is a little specific to me and this experience with it. I must admit that I didn't know the name of these levels while I was actually playing the game. The reason being that, because I'm awesome and better than console scrubs, I installed this game on my solid state drive, and the level names only appear on the loading screens, which are so full of information and images I barely got a chance to understand what I was looking at. I mention this because I think it's important to understand that I very much learned the name of this section before I finished playing it. 2 Betrayals sees us come under attack by the Halo security systems as well as the Flood and the Covenant. This entire section is basically the level I now know is called Assault on the Control Room, but backwards, with a few extra bits of padding thrown in to drag it out a bit. Now honestly, I didn't mind that fact so much. I didn't see it as backtracking at the time because I hadn't literally just come through these areas, and having all 3 enemy factions duking it out around me was pretty enjoyable, like I said. I did groan at having to repeat those repetitive rooms once again, but I felt this was well countered by being able to dick around in more flying vibrators, having awkward little dogfights and strafing the ground troops before being shot out of the sky by some twat with a rocket launcher I couldn't see. These bits in particular also made me realise, what other single player games let you dick around in and out of vehicles like this? What other games give you an area with ground and air vehicles and the weapons to counter them and let you loose like this? I know I was supposed to be telling you why 2 Betrayals managed to damage my very psyche, but I wanted brown nose this game a little bit more before I wipe that brown off my nose and rub it in its eye. I try to avoid most online discourse about games these days because, well, the internet in general is a bit of a dumpster fire and people seem to hate everything for wildly absurd reasons. One thing that I do often see people complaining about is lack of replayability in games, and that sort of demand is something that these live service shit heaps attempt to cater to. Now, let me just put on my old man hat. There we go. Why did we stop making clothes out of asbestos anyway? A game does not need new or additional content to be replayable. You do not need branching storylines or character classes or anything like that for a game to be replayable. If a game is good, you'll want to play it again. Just like with films, books, or songs. No one complains about the replayability of films or songs, and if anything, people enjoy rewatches because it often allows you to notice small details that you maybe missed on your first watch or listen, and the same is true of games. The reason it was so impactful to see the Citadel blowing up in the Half-Life 2 episodes is because so many of us had replayed the previous game dozens of times before this came out and watched hours and hours of lore speculation videos trying to figure out the mysteries behind what we see in the games, so to see such an iconic structure in a new state was an event in itself. In what I laughably call research, trying to find out what made Halo so impactful on release, I found plenty of media about people gushing about this game. But it was an old episode of the Kane and Rinse podcast where they talked about the amount of options Halo gives you to approach situations. The game is the same every time you play it, but you have options. The game gives you several solutions to your Covenant and/or Flood problem and lets you have a play with all of them. I mentioned earlier that I found the Needler to be pretty useless, but apparently on harder difficulties it becomes a much more important weapon. We don't need new campaigns or levels or anything to bring us back to a game. Just give us an immersive world to play in and enjoyable mechanics to interact with, and we will be running back time and time again. It's ironic that I'm bringing this up in a Halo video, as I tend to level the blame for the rise of live service games squarely at Destiny, Bungie's other popular shooter. I have played that though, it came bundled with my PS4, but it can fuck off straight in the bin. That's the game, not the PS4, that can stay. Now that I've managed to swing that praise around to a negative tone, let's crack on. So 2 Betrayals sees us having to flee back through almost the entire assault on the control room level, but we have to pop over to some pulse generators along the way to prevent Guilty Spark from activating Halo. Like I said, I didn't mind the level too much in itself, though there was another incident of a bit too much of the repetitive rooms and bridges to get across, and the scarcity of health packs coupled with the abundance of enemy grenades was making things tricky, and the rocket launcher wielding twats that hang around just before the next checkpoint can take a long walk off a short pier. My annoyance with this level came when I emerged back into the large open area I had cleared earlier. I set about clearing the enemy Flood and Covenant forces, shooting down the Banshee and their tanks and mopping up all the enemies. My objective is way up there, so I needed a Banshee. I had one earlier, but I had to leave it behind a broken door underground. I've just shot down the only one I could find, so I went looking around. This cave is blocked. So is this one, and this ledge here is clearly a barrier designed to be crossed one way, kind of like a low wall in Pokemon. I went back to the underground bit where I left my Banshee, tried to blow up or bash the door open, but no luck. Maybe I needed to rush the Banshee to get to it before anyone else takes it. I'll just load my last checkpoint and have another go. Oh, this was already after I'd blown it up. Well, let's have a look online, see what the solution is. It seems like I do need that Banshee. I guess I'll just have to restart the level and have another go then. It can't be that far back. I mean, those little titles of the darkened screen come up semi-regularly. Oh no. Oh my god, no, that can't be right. Oh, tell me I can undo this. I can't undo this. I have to start again from here? Here? I very nearly quit at this point. There's nothing that can turn me off playing a game quicker than having to play huge sections again because the game glitched or I got soft locked or something like that. All that struggle through that one room in particular full of flood, learning where the rocket twats were, meticulously clearing those bloody bridges, clearing whole areas only for one twat in the dark to nail me with a rocket launcher, all for nothing. Fuck you, start again. But I didn't give up. I did close the game and go and make a cup of tea and do some heavy breathing though. I got through the level a bit more quickly the second time, mainly because I knew where those arseholes with rocket launchers were hiding, but before I emerged from the tunnels into that last combat arena once more, I looked up online as to what the hell I need to do here, because I don't want to go back and do all of that again. Turns out if you run your ghost at the corner of that impassable ledge, then you can get up it, and over the way there are a couple of banshees just sat there, chilling. I was more than a little pissed off at myself for this, but my ego can't handle self-criticism, so I'll blame modern signposting techniques in games for being such an improvement over older games that this archaic design made me think it was an intentional barricade. Or something like that anyway. I will say that after playing through this level for a second time, it did strike me as a sort of victory lap for the game. It encompasses every style of encounter that the game has to offer and packs it all into what is actually a reasonably sized level. It just felt longer because I'd suck at it and I had to do it twice. Although it might not have felt so long if they've come up with some less repetitive rooms. Have I mentioned how repetitive some of these levels are yet? Along the way on this long and repetitive journey, Cortana mentions that she has found the crash site of the Pillar of Autumn and we can overload the engines to cause an explosion big enough to destroy the Halo. The thing is, we need Captain Keyes for that, and his signal is coming from a Covenant cruiser. Again, I think it's the same one actually. Cortana reveals that she can actually teleport us, but it's dangerous, so that's why we had to walk all this way just now, and she teleports us onto the ship, which is partially destroyed and overrun with flood. Part of this section is where I think the newer graphics are a definite improvement over the original ones. There's a section where you have to drop out of the ship, which I avoided for ages because that drop just screams instant death for me, and run around in the canyons beneath the ship to find a way back in. The texture of the underside of the cruiser in this area looks nasty, frankly, and it looked more like some sort of alien night sky to me than the underside of a battleship. Whatever it is we're fighting beneath, we navigate our way between Flood and Covenant forces to find Captain Keyes, who is now fully infected by the Flood. Seems like this might have been a good opportunity for a boss fight, but instead we just pull his neural implants out of his mushy skull and head to the flight deck to grab a ship and head for the Autumn, with some more intense combat scenarios along the way. We grab a Banshee and head to the big ship, which is poised precariously at the edge of a cliff. We get to the bridge and start the self-destruction when the murderous personality core shows up to stop the countdown. I guess because Cortana is currently plugged into the ship means he now also has access to all of the ship's records, which he suggests involves all of human history. Because I thought we took Cortana with us so that the Covenant couldn't get their hands on that information. I don't fully understand how he has access to all of it, but either way, we now need to trigger the destruction of the ship ourselves. So we fight our way through the Autumn and into the engine room, which is full of floods and sentinels fighting each other and you. We have to climb up to the top level and hit a button to expose each of the 4 engine parts, and then bung an explosive in there. The first 3 I managed to get with grenades, but I'd run out by the 4th one and there were none left to pick up. Cortana told me to go to the nearby weapons storage room to get more ammo, which was a surprisingly long way away considering it was apparently put there to stop players from being able to softlock themselves out of completing the game. The engines go critical and now we need to escape, so we jump into a Warthog and speed through the doomed ship. Again, these things handle like a drunk baby in a wobbly pushchair, so despite the tension being created by the visuals and the soundtrack, I was nearly rolling over a few times and slowly 3-point turning around pillars. I did actually get to the end of this section on my first attempt, where our dropship buddy was going to pick us up, only for her to get shot down on her approach. As I sat there mourning our dead friend, a passing Banshee shot my Warthog and flung me over the edge into oblivion, so I had to restart the entire run again. It took me a few more attempts to get back to the end because I kept rolling over or getting blown up. Again, why have I seen so much hate for the Mako when this is a thing that exists? I made it to the end, I stroll my way through some explosions while causing a couple of my own, and we blast out of there, clear of the halo just before it explodes, killing everyone we left down there. Something Cortana rationalizes as a necessity, because otherwise the flood could have gotten off there and wiped everybody out. Apparently there's a post-credit scene where we see Guilty Gear floating through space, but the Master Chief Collection just dropped me back to its main menu, so I had to find out about that later. I also found out about the extra little ending you get on Legendary difficulty, which is a nice little touch, I guess. Which left me to reflect on having finally experienced that shooter which Xbox nerds have been banging on about for the last 20 odd years. And to be fair, yeah, I can see why, I really enjoyed this game. Sure, the graphics are clearly outdated, even the newer ones, but it has that early 2000s aesthetic which is starting to be replicated in indie games now, and it's something I grew up with, so I can appreciate it for what it is. The lack of texture details makes large rooms feel more ominous and haunting, almost otherworldly, which is perfect for a sci-fi shooter set on a strange planet, or installation, or whatever the hell Halo technically is. In terms of gameplay mechanics though, this really doesn't feel dated at all to me. Then again, it seems like most modern AAA shooters are open worlds with crafting, so to people raised on that sort of thing, this probably does feel archaic, but I personally found it quite refreshing. No collectibles, no unlocks, just your guns, grenades and a jump button. The combat feels great and the music really helps to elevate the atmosphere set by the scenarios you find yourself in. The story was pretty good too, in my opinion. We aren't bogged down with too much exposition, the Flood were introduced at just the right time, and the Betrayal was a suitable surprise too. Though that section was called 2 Betrayals, so other than the piece of terrain tricking me into thinking I couldn't get past it, what was the second betrayal? Guilty Spark was one, what was the other one? Did I miss something? Also, if the Halo is part of a system designed to passively wipe out the Flood, why is there a load of parasites locked up in storage? That seems like a design flaw to me, just like Guilty Spark needing someone to help him turn the Halo on. But if everyone was being sensible, we wouldn't have a game to play, would we? And I guess the Ghostbusters did keep all the ghosts in a box on the wall that could be opened by a power cut. I played this game because I wanted to see if older games that I held up as legendary would still be entertaining to people who had never played them. Obviously, to properly answer that question, I'd have to play all of these sorts of games, but for Halo at least, I can now fully understand why this was so revered on release and is still looked back on fondly to this day. And I would have no issue recommending this to anyone like myself who has gone this long without playing it. I do find it strange that more shooters didn't try to emulate Halo in more obvious ways. Sure, the recharging shield, grenade button and restricted weapon loadouts became the standard until very recently, but why did other shooters seem to go in the opposite direction in terms of level design? After Call of Duty 4, they all doubled down on linear shooting corridors, and little to nothing attempted to recreate Halo's open combat areas. I do remember playing a game called Breed, which my brain tells me was similar to this, but after watching some videos of it, it turns out I can't remember that game at all, and just look at that HUD.
Oh! Yes, we know it's horrible, it's probably best you not look at it.
I didn't intend on doing a full ranking series for Halo because I didn't want to commit to the idea before knowing if I'd even enjoyed the first game. Now that I've played it, then yeah, I will rank the series. Well, at least all the mainline Halo games that are on Game Pass, anyway. This whole experience did make me realise something though, something that can only be achieved literally once in a lifetime. Throughout this video, I've been asking questions about things that happened or were said in the game, about what Guilty Spark says, about whether there are other Master Chiefs, why humans of the Covenant are at war, and all the rest of it. These are questions people would have been discussing on internet forums back in the day, speculating and hypothesizing about every detail, playing the game over and over again to try and spot things that they missed, like this weird little emu statue I found in one level. This is the sort of thing that I was doing after Half-Life 2 came out. So when Episode 2 showed us an actual portal storm, that was a big deal. I'd spent the last 3 years reading forum posts and Wikipedia pages about these things, and now we actually get to see one. If someone were to play through those games now, one after the other, this event would not have that same impact. I'm sure many of the questions I've had about Halo will be answered in the next game at least, which is great and everything, but I wouldn't have had that 3-year gap between games to speculate and get hyped about it, and now I daren't look anything up about it for fear of spoilers. People watching Breaking Bad now won't have to suffer through the 11-month wait to see whether Hank finishes his poo or not. They won't even have to wait for the credits to finish, so that next episode loses some of that impact and tension. I'm not really sure I have a point with this little ramble, but I think it's important to remember that the period between games is important in how you interpret and feel about each entry. And it's something that is only available to experience at one specific point in human history. So yeah, the Halo ranking series is officially a go. I am working on another series ranking though, so I'm going to be alternating between the two. One thing I learned from my Assassin's Creed and Far Cry series is that you can start to become numb to a game series when you mainline it for too long, so I'm hoping that mixing it up will keep each series interesting for me to play. What is the next ranking series I'm currently working on? Well, you better subscribe to find out. Those videos will start coming out in the new year, and I'm hoping to get them out a little more regularly as we're dealing with more linear games that don't take as long to play through. I won't say what series I'm working on, but I did drop a hint in the Far Cry 6 video, and the only other clue I'll give is that it's a PlayStation exclusive series. For now at least, anyway. So thank you very much for watching. I've been wanting to do this video for a long time and I'm glad to finally have it out there, leaving me waiting for all of the hate from the feral Halo fans because I didn't talk about their favourite bit or I missed an entire level or something like that. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and please do consider becoming a channel member if you enjoy and want to support my content. Members get credits in the videos and early access to them, and it also gets me a little bit closer to my goal of being able to turn off adverts on my content while still being able to afford to eat and be warm. This is my last video of 2024, and I just want to thank everyone who has supported and enjoyed the channel throughout this year, and I hope you'll stick around as we continue to grow this weird little corner of YouTube further into 2025. Have a great Christmas for those who celebrate, enjoy your day off work for those that don't, and for anyone working on Christmas, you have my deepest sympathies.